Hello, welcome to my review for Faces Places, a documentary that was released last year in America in certain film festivals, maybe even a general release, I'm not too sure, and now in 2018 is coming out in more general screenings in Europe and so on and so forth. And I've really been looking forward to this film for a very long time. I'm so excited to talk about it, and I'm happy that I got to see it last week. Really, just one I was anticipating quite a bit. It's a documentary about these two artists, I guess you could call them. The first being Agnès Varda, who is now approaching her 90th birthday in a couple of months. She's a filmmaker who was a part of the French New Wave, actually. She was really the only female force as far as a director of movies in the French New Wave, and if you follow film history in any way, shape or form, you'll at least be familiar with the term French New Wave. I'm by no means an authority on the subject, but she was there with all, Jean-Luc Godard, and she was married to Jacques Demy, and then you have just all those legends who made these really, at the time, revolutionary films that kind of formed and inspired future filmmakers. But she was there making her own films too, and so she's a very interesting character, and I first saw one of her films last year as part of the Epic Film Challenge 2, 1,000 More Movies You Must See Before You Die. One of her documentaries was in the book, The Gleaners and I, and I was just so taken by not even the film, but just as much as her. Her spirit, her zest, her kind of her spark, her enthusiasm for art and life, and both of those things intertwined. I love her outlook on life, I love her outlook on art, and so I just love her. I think she's awesome. I then kind of delved into her filmography. I watched some more of her other documentaries, one of her kind of fiction narrative films as well, and I think her last movie was about 10 years ago, The Beaches of Agnès. So this is kind of a return to her in the filmmaking world, and could very well be her last film. She's about to turn 90. In the film they cover the fact that her eyesight is starting to fail somewhat, although I listened to a podcast with her and JR, the artist who she works with on this film. They co-directed it together, and on the podcast they were talking about the process of how they met, and how he was a fan of her films and she was a fan of his art and his exhibitions and so on, and they met in France, and then the day afterwards they started working on this movie, which is really cool. But she states in that podcast that I'm not blind, I could still see, just the focusing issue, so she's she ain't done yet. I would love to see her do another one. That'd be, I really like the idea of her just living this ridiculously long life and just still making these great films. But if this is the last one, oh, what a swan song to a great force in filmmaking. It's a breath of fresh air to me, seeing her movies and exploring them. So to get to see a new one when it's just come out is so cool to me. Me and Connie watched it together as well, and she really liked it, which I was glad of, because it's not really an impressive movie on the surface. So JR, let's talk about him a little bit. He's this artist who works with portraits and taking pictures of people and pasting those pictures onto buildings, usually in big, large forms. And he'll take eyes or faces, and it can be a picture that he takes right there and then in the moment, and then within 10-15 minutes he's pasting it on a building. Or it can be a picture from 100 years ago that he's putting onto a building, and he does all these exhibitions and things like that, and murals and all sorts of stuff. And he has this kind of signature where he wears sunglasses. He never shows anyone his eyes. It's this kind of mysterious aura about him. And at first I thought this was just in the movie, but I learned that this is how he is, in everyday life. He always wears the sunglasses. He's in his late 30s, and so we have this interesting dynamic between him and Agnès, where, she's this elderly woman, he's this guy in the prime of his life, and they're both making art together. She's making the movie, he's making the artworks. They travel around northern France to all these little villages and towns in his van. And his van is really cool. It has this just a picture of a camera on the side, and it's literally this mobile kind of photo studio where they'll pull up to a small town and they'll get some people together and say, will you have your picture taken, and paste it on this wall. And so they sit inside the van, it's like a photo booth, takes their picture, and then it instantly prints out on this big kind of like movie poster size sheet their picture. And then they can glue it onto a wall or whatever, or cut it out. And there's lots of different ways where the people who get their picture taken, they get involved in the process. There's one sequence where they go to this abandoned kind of little village, just broken down buildings, and they have a picnic there. you know, where there was once life and there is nothing there now, it's all derelict. They bring life back to it. And everyone has a picnic, they have a good time, they take their pictures, they cut them out, you know, the people get involved in creating this stuff, and they paste their own faces on these buildings of, you know, days gone by, and the ghosts of these buildings that, you know, are no longer occupied have now been reoccupied by the faces of people who are now, you know, I love that kind of stuff. And what I loved about the film was that it's so like life-affirming and just positive and lovely and thought-provoking, without really feeling like it. What I think Agnes really injects into the movies that she makes is effortless energy. There's such an energy, positive energy to the stuff that she makes, and it just feels like it just flows out of her, like there's no effort involved, which is not to say that there isn't. I'm sure that, especially now, getting on in her years, in her late 80s, that it certainly wasn't effortless to put together and make a film, but that's what it feels like. And that's really rare, to make a film, to tell a story within a documentary especially, that really, to me, engaged me and had me hooked by the end. I mean, there isn't a real grand arc, but there's a beat right at the end of the film that was really sweet, and I think to some people maybe saccharine. I think some people would think that the ending of this film is very kind of cheesy. And in a sense, on paper, it is. But because it's her doing it, it just felt so right and beautiful, you know, and definitely I'm at the risk of sounding wanky in this review, but I loved it. I was so taken with it, and just again the happenstance of it, just the way that it flowed, and the podcast I was listening to, the Filmstruck podcast, they were talking about how the events you see in the film were very free-flowing. They just happened, you know, where it's like, and you see in the film some of that stuff where they go to this small village and they're looking for stuff to do, and they go to a waitress and they say, hey, would you have your pictures taken, blown up and put on a building? And she's like, yeah, sure, why not? Okay, we'd like to have you wear a dress, you know. And then someone on the other side of the street, I got a dress that you can wear, you can borrow my dress. Okay, cool. And then Agnes says, an umbrella, we need to have her holding an umbrella. Does anyone have an umbrella? No one's got an umbrella, and there's one guy goes, oh wait, I think I'll be back in a second. He runs off, he comes back, he's like, yeah, this is my mother's umbrella that she used in her wedding in 1973, you can use it for the picture. They take a picture of the woman with the umbrella, you know, JR takes the picture with his camera, and then they print it off and they put it up on this huge building, this huge portrait. Then they come back, and people are saying, the locals are saying, oh, people come from all around to see this, you know, post on Instagram and stuff, and that's another thing, is that these pictures get pasted on the walls, and then everyone's taking selfies with them, and kind of, I mean, these things aren't going to last forever, they'll get washed away over time, but they're becoming immortalized with the selfies and things like that. So the form of photography and stuff, we see some of Agnes's early photography work from like the 50s and 60s. At one point they actually take a picture she took of an old friend of hers who's long since passed away, I'm sure, and they put it onto this, it's an incredible thing, there's this beach where a bunker that was on the cliff top fell onto the beach, and it's just like, it's like that, it's like kind of diagonal, it's this weird thing in the middle of this beach, and they put a picture on it, and it looks awesome the way they put it together and everything, and then the next day it's gone, completely washed away. And there's something about that, about memories and photos capturing memories, and how those memories do get wiped away over time, but again, it never feels forced, and it's maybe it's just because I think about that so much. I think about memories and the way things kind of fade over time. And that's me putting myself into the things that we see. It doesn't force you any kind of message. But if you're the kind of person who kind of is very introspective in that sense, and thinks about things and memories and life and how finite everything is, then, you know, I think you get a lot out of it. They meet this old guy who's like, I think in his 70s, and he just lives on his own in this kind of little kind of wood, and he's collected thousands of bottle caps. He just makes art pieces with them, just because, you know. And he's like, I'm happy because I'm breathing air, I'm living, you know, and it's pretty cool, you know. In his 70s, I love stuff like that, and how they follow these paths, you know, very spontaneous. That's a word I was looking for earlier, where they'll just follow things, they just capture just people, you know, and there's an old mining town they go to where the buildings are about to get knocked down, but there's this one woman who won't leave her house, and so they interview her, and they stood outside the house, and she opens the living room window and has a chat with them outside. I just found that funny how they conducted the interview from the street, and then they paste her face, this huge image of her face on her house in tribute to her, you know, for being there so long and everything and what it means. And she leaves and she looks back at her house and she, you know, she almost breaks down because it means so much. And that's just, those kinds of emotions and connecting with people. I love it. And I love Agnes Varda. And I loved the relationship between her and JR that progresses throughout the film, where there's a lot of shots of them just sitting down on a bench, kind of just talking. You know, we'll see them from afar, kind of observing. And the playfulness, you know, where they're sitting down and, oh, this is a good spot, yeah. And then he looks over and he's like, yeah, but, you know, your legs don't even touch the floor. And she's like kicking her legs like a kid. So he pokes fun at her and stuff. And just little details, you know, again, where they're sitting down and she's asking him, like, why do you, you know, you clearly like being around old people like me. And he's like, yeah, I grew up with old people, you know, my grandmother, you know, kind of helped raise me pretty much. And Agnes says, is your grandmother still alive? He says, yeah, she's 100 now. Agnes says, can I meet her? He's like, yeah, sure. They go and meet his grandmother. They say hi, hello, how are you? Yeah, you know, very nice. And that's it. It doesn't go anywhere. There's no kind of, you know, poignant moment there. It's just the act of, oh, I want to meet her. I want to explore. You know, I want to do things. I want to see new people. You know, meet new people, talk to people. You know, discover stories. That's what the film is all about. Faces, places. You know, and there's more I could talk about that I loved about the film. I'm not going to break down the entire movie and everything that happens in it, but it's like 80, 90 minutes. And it packed a punch for me by the end. There was just something about it. There's something special about this movie, and I'm so glad that it happened, that it got made, and I loved, you know, just the ideas of it that were shown in the art pieces that they made and created, and the way Agnes created the film. She has such a playful feel to her as a person, and that comes through the films that she makes as well. And obviously with JR kind of never taking off his glasses, she doesn't like it. She's like, oh, I can't see you because, you know, I can't see into your eyes. And so you're feeling like, okay, this is, I mean, it definitely feels constructed in that way. The events where they go to places and they meet people and do the art, that feels very spontaneous and free, but there's these linking segments that feel a bit more constructed, which are actually a lot of fun, you know, and you know, they know what they're doing. Yeah, it's not like they're trying to convince you of something. It's very obvious that this is a little sequence that is, you know, more movie-like, you know, where you'll have a shot of Agnes and JR at a bus stop. And you hear the voiceover of saying, we didn't meet at a bus stop, you know, just things like that. Little kind of almost skits in a way, which she has done a lot in her documentaries, little kind of skit elements that kind of peppered throughout. And at one point they're sat on the beach where the thing got washed away and all this sand is blowing. It's this dreamlike sequence, and they're both sat there with their coats on and stuff, and she's like, oh, it's almost like we're getting swept away, the voiceover says. And she's like, and I haven't even got him to take his glasses off yet, which is kind of like a playful little nod, like, you know it's coming. You know that it's coming, he's going to take his glasses off at the end of the movie. That's what we're building up towards, you know. But I love the way that was handled and dealt with, and for me it's my number 2 film of the year so far. And if I saw it again, I might even put it at number 1. I think that my current number 1, Coco, is a little bit more emotionally powerful and packs more of a punch, but this packs more of a punch without trying, I think, which is really something, and deals a little bit with Agnes, you know, her aging and stuff. And if you're touchy about eyeballs, might have a bit of a problem with this, because there's a sequence where we see her get injected, like there's proper Clockwork Orange style, opening her eye, and they inject her eyeball because of her failing eyesight and stuff, and they incorporate that into the film a little bit, not too much. Again, nothing feels like it's too much in this film. It's just right. So yeah, that's how I would sum up Faces Places. It has an effortless energy to it. It's spontaneous. It celebrates life, but it doesn't try too much, and it's just right. So I would hope that you'd go and see it. I can't imagine many people watching this. I remember when I put up my review for The Gleaners and I, no one really watched it. It's one of those films that isn't going to get seen by a lot of people, and that's unfortunate. I think that people could get something out of this. Again, it isn't a film I think is like a great masterpiece that people have to see and everyone's going to love. No. You need to be of a certain temperament, personality, I think, to enjoy something like this as much as I did, at least. You know, it certainly is, you know, it goes at its own pace. It doesn't really have a big message to tell, at least not overtly, I think. It's there if you want it. If it's inside you already, maybe, then you might get it. But, you know. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Faces Places, my rambling thoughts on the film. Loved it, loved it, loved it. Can't wait to see it again at some point. And one can only hope that Agnes makes, you know, another film again, but if she doesn't, I think this is just such a great and lovely swan song for a great filmmaker. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
It's alright by me. Apart from the fact he throws cans of Carlin into a tree. Yeah, he's really cool. Yeah, he's really cool. But he's not quite as cool as you, 'cause